So welcome everyone. And we'll start with a short round of introductions. My name is Yuval. I came from Israel to be here today to moderate this event. I see some familiar faces here in the audience. I'm the founder of the UX Writing Hub, and that's about it. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I am Tim Toscano. I work at JPMorgan Chase, content lead in our wealth management area, serving global internal experiences. So we can talk more about that later. Great to see all of you.
Does this one work? Yes. I'm still Kate. Welcome to Havas. I already did this spiel, so I will hand it off to Jed.
Hi, my name is Jed Baker. I am the UX and product writing lead at Lemonade. We sell insurance, and I've been there about a year and a half. Before that, I was at Etsy, and before that, I was at Yammer. Who's heard of Yammer? Wow, the most people I've ever seen who've heard of it.
Awesome. Yeah. Is there a microphone over there? Hi, my name's Sean Rowe, and I am a content designer at Robinhood, working currently on the retirement team. And previously, I'm going to lean towards you, okay, Jed? Previously, I was on the stock trading team, and previously, I was at Capital One as a content strategist, content designer, and all the names that we go by for almost 5 years. And I love legal and compliance. I'm not kidding.
Okay. So the discussion today is going to work well. We've curated questions beforehand, and we are going to have a session 40 minutes in where we will collect questions here from the audience. There's going to be a QR code right here. You could scan it and submit questions to me. If it's going to be too complicated, just raise your hands. I guess that will be fine as well. You know, and let's dive right in. So today we're going to talk about legal and how to write with legal teams. And let's start. So first of all, let's define it. So what exactly, how do you define legalese? And let's start with Kate.
Incomprehensible, unhuman, hard to read, impossible to understand, intentionally difficult to navigate. That's how I would define it. Yeah.
That's a good definition. And how do you work with your legal team at Havas?
So we work with many clients. We actually, being an agency, have to work with the legal teams of each individual client that we're working with. So we don't have to deal with our internal legal team. So different from everyone else probably up here tonight. So I try to work with the legal teams of our clients early and often. And we try to bring them in the kickoff, understand, whenever we're launching a project, understand what the legal restrictions are going to be, what the process is going to be, what the governance around making sure our copy or our content is approved by legal. So we, yes, have to work with many legal teams, which makes our lives probably much more complicated. I'm very jealous of all these client-side people here tonight who have just one legal team. So yes, that's how we work with them.
So it's with your client's legal team, right?
With the client's legal team. So we will take on a project typically with a brand team or a marketing team with one of our clients. We will do all of our work with them. And the pitfall is doing all of the work with the brand team, getting this beautiful copy written, and then they send it on to their legal team and all of it gets cut and scratched. And yes, exactly, footnote after footnote after footnote. So we've tried to circumnavigate that problem by making sure we talk about the legal process in the kickoff call, and they understand that they're going to have to get the copy in front of the legal team as soon as possible so that we don't have to lose all the work that we did building up to that.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's say that we have freelancers in the audience today. So what would be your tip to them or other agencies, basically?
To talk about the legal governance process and the workflow process in your initial conversation. So make sure that you are bringing that up from the beginning so you understand as soon as you're talking about, okay, we're going to be creating this content, we're going to be designing this site, we're going to be designing this product or this app, what is you, the client, what is your legal review process? Who are the people we need to bring into this conversation? Can we bring them in today? Can we bring them in tomorrow? So that we don't end up in a place where we create a lot of beautiful copy that then has to be tossed in the bin because it doesn't meet legal requirements.
All right. Sounds like a great tip. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Tom, how would you define legalese?
Well, I guess, Kate, you'll be a little more jealous because I'm not currently working with any legal teams.
Very jealous.
Our internal experiences are not going through legal review, which is really great. But legalese, I guess I would define it as like justifying lawyers' jobs. Like they want to, no one really, a lot of people don't like lawyers. I think they get a bad reputation. They're obviously there to protect us, to protect the business. And so I can empathize with them on that regard. But yeah, it can be, being in financial services for many years, it can be certainly a challenge to understand what they're trying to get across. So yeah, like Kate, I think the key is to put yourself in their shoes as much as you can and sort of start early discovery with them to try and understand what risks they're trying to deal with so that we can, I think once you understand that, then you can help solve some of the balance what we're trying to do, which is a clear, concise copy that people want to engage with versus the legalese that no one wants to read. I don't know if that really defines it, but I think most of us here know the heretofores and but I think that's been going away for a long time too. They're starting to get it as well.
In what way?
Well, I look back at, I started my career at Fidelity Investments a long time ago, and there was a movement back then in the mid 90s to start moving prospectuses toward plain language. So yeah, it's been a long process, obviously, that we still are not there, and most people don't even read them, or we don't mail them really anymore. But the process of trying to make legalese understandable to customers has been going on for a long time. It just seems like it's never going to end.
Thank you. And Jed, how about you?
So I kind of see, in the same way that a UX writer's job is to make something as clear as possible, but also as short as possible. It does feel, from a layman's perspective, that the legal job is to make it as clear as possible by being as long as possible. And that is to the end of it protecting everybody involved in the contract or whatever the end of the legal kind of writing is. And there's a certain vocabulary that comes with that, like anything else. And for a long time, I think it was, we lived in a world where the only people who ever needed to see the legal documents were people who knew the legal language. And we have evolved into a world where that's not the case as much anymore. So there is a push everywhere, as Tim was saying, and at Lemonade as well, where we are kind of pushing the limits of that. It's like so this is like the pure legal language. How can we push that to a place where it's still doing its job, but it is parsable to somebody who doesn't understand all that vocabulary? But I think there's a break line. There's a point where it goes, once you clarify, once you make it simpler language, it breaks. So there is a point beyond which legalese cannot go, I think. There's a point which it stops doing its job, which is effectively to protect everybody that's signing on to this contract or whatever. So, I think that we're all trying to do the same thing. It's just the ends are necessarily different. But in both ways, working with legal, there are times when it's a push, you're pushing back and forth, and you're like, okay, well, what if it said this? What if it said this? But there's times when I'm like, okay, I will, as a UX writer, okay, it doesn't have to be just one word. I know that's problematic. Okay, I know we need to have that disclaimer underneath there, even though it ruins the design. So it's all about this kind of figuring out where everybody is in the process and getting to the, like, going towards the middle, both of you, as much as you can.
Do you feel like that in a company like Lemonade, the legal team push for better user experience, or is it something that you need to push yourself?
Yeah. So one of the first things I do whenever I start a new job as a UX writer is I try to meet the legal team as quickly as possible and become very good friends with them, because it is beneficial and they're usually wonderful people. But knowing the people who are there, having that relationship allows you to, you're not just a face on Slack being like, hey, can we change this? You're somebody, they know who you are, they know what you're trying to do. And if you have a dialogue going, like I said, it's sort of like we're both pushing back and forth, and it ends up, it's like a tug of war that ends in a stalemate because it ends up just in the middle. And I sort of align myself. There's as a designer or a writer, you can sort of want to just make it exactly how you want and like push that aside and say, I don't want to do anything that legal says. But I think that like by sitting down with them, basically say they give you a really long sentence and you're like, you sit down with them and instead of saying, what about this short sentence instead, you say, what is this sentence doing? Like, what is the thing behind this language that we're trying to get across? And then you can rewrite your thing, your shorter thing, to have the same idea rather than taking a word out or making this text smaller or something like that. So it's really about the more you can understand what is the purpose of the legal language, the better your content design or UX writing is going to be.
Thank you. That was a great answer. And Sean, how about you?
First, a legal disclaimer. Nothing I will be talking about is financial advice about Robinhood stock or investing at all. I'm only talking about content design and my experience.
So that's true of me as well.
Does anybody else?
And past performance is no guarantee of future results.
Correct.
Right?
JPMorgan gets it. Awesome. So I define legalese as something that you're more likely to find in a legal contract and less likely to say out loud. If you wouldn't say it out loud to your friend, your cousin, your family member, your neighbor, and it more likely belongs in a contract, that's probably legalese. So that's a simple way of how I think about it. As for working with legal and compliance, I do have lots of legal and compliance partners, I think like 8 or 9, and I don't know what they all represent, to be honest, but there's a lot of them, and I have to get all of them to agree on the words that we're crafting for the experience. So doubling down on what Jed said, first thing, build a relationship. It's huge. They're people, they're humans. We call them lawyers, and we'd say people don't like lawyers, but my mom was a lawyer. I like my mom. She's a good person. She does speak in certain words, and I know when she's hedging herself to make it so I can't have that toy or whatever, but they are humans. So I always have a one-on-one with legal partners, get to know them, and don't jump into work. Talk about what you do for fun on the weekend, talk about your family, ask them, a lot of us are remote these days, like, oh, where are you based? A lot of my partners aren't based in the same place where I am, for example. Be a human to them. And I don't think of it as a battle, right? But the conversations and discussions that you have will go a lot smoother. That's been my experience, at least.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. It's all about communication. And as a content designer, it's really important to have that communication aspect, not only with legal teams, but with your designers, developers, and with your legal team. Have those one-on-ones.
Oh, and I always make sure to have a one-on-one with the difficult partner. Yeah. I just joined a new project a couple months ago, and they were like, oh, this particular partner, they're always really challenging. And I was like, one-on-one, I won't meet this person. And he was like, oh, so you're one of those writers, are you? And I was like, I prefer content designer. And we just went from there, and we became BFFs. So I'm serious. Well, not serious, but the challenging ones, don't avoid them. get to know them, and you'll have a better chance of understanding, understanding what they need to convey in the content. And then when it comes to writing the content, we mentioned like being concise, right? For sure, that's part of it. But the way that I'd like to think of it, and this kind of legal and compliance appreciate this, I am going to write as many words as I need to write. And I'm going to write as few as I can. Okay. And I'm a big believer in content first design, right? I don't want to be given a box and say, can you say that really long disclosure and all that stuff in does it have to be 3 lines? Can it be 2 lines? And it's like, no, I'm writing 5 lines, right? And then I'm going to take my team and I'm going to get feedback on how to make it more conversational and tighten it up, right? And I might get 3 lines, right? But try to avoid writing in a box. Write everything you need to write, and then write as few as you can, as little as you can.
That's a great tip. And following on that, Sean, I also want to ask you about like the negotiation part. So with your new BFF, so how do you, once you have that one-on-one, they push to their side, you want to push to your side, do you have any like best practices to that type of negotiation with the legal team?
Yes, I think Jed already kind of answered this. I'll double down on what he said. You really want to know the intent of what needs to be said, as opposed to, I don't like this, or it's too long, right? It's too long just means you're cutting words, but if you're cutting words, you might be losing the intent, or you might be losing the specific phrase that needs to be represented for your customers or your potential customers, whoever you're writing for. In our case, Robinhood is a brokerage and has to do with investing broadly. So there are inherent risks in that, and we need to be fair and balanced and transparent about those risks, because we want our customers to make the best decisions for them. We don't want to hide that, and so we need to know what the intent is. So it's really important in having those discussions not to say I don't like it or it's too long, but to say what needs to be said, right? And they say, okay, well, I really need it to be X, Y, Z, and you say, okay, we could say it that way. Does this keep the intent? A trick also, what I found, I worked at Capital One previously, which is also a financial institution, and I hosted a weekly legal compliance and content, we called it Power Hour, but it was office hours essentially. And it was not a forum for official review. So you weren't getting sign off on the content, but you were presenting your content, getting feedback, from a content design perspective, but legal and compliance was there to be able to see what was going to come through and eventually need to be officially approved. And they would be able to set the guard rails for that. I made the mistake one time of not including them early in my career. And I designed this whole experience, I helped design this whole experience, and I used the word purchases. By the time I got to legal and compliance, they were like, it's actually transactions. And I was like, oh, come on, purchases is more conversational. And they're like, no, purchases means you bought something. A transaction could be an interest payment or a transfer to someone or to another account, and that's included in the situation. And I was like, oh, okay, difference between transaction and purchase. I wish I had known that earlier, right? It would have influenced, how we write it, or maybe even how we design the experience. So invite them early and often, and give yourself time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't care how long it is, Jeff.
My next question is about legal, like regulations and accessibility. Kate, I know that you have a lot of experience when it comes to creating legal and accessible content for many different projects. So tell us more about that.
Yes. So I think, when we always try to design everything that we're doing in the most accessible way possible. Accessible means understandable human language. So that is always our goal. We know that legal language is not that. So we look for design solutions to make sure that the legal content can still be there without interrupting the natural kind of human dialogue narrative flow on a page. So I think that can come to life in many different ways. And being on an agency side means we're always working within different clients' component libraries or within the restrictions of their different sites. So it's looking for ways that we can, the legal team will come, they'll look at the copy and they'll say, oh, you need to add 17 sentences right here after this sentence to explain why all of these things you just said have to be modified or maybe are not 100% true, blah, 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 blah. And they want to put it, right in the body copy on the page. So we have said, we need to keep this understandable to the user. We can't, put 1,700 words of legal copy right on this page about your service or your product. So let's look for a design solution where we can make sure that that copy is accessible, but hide it in a way, either behind, a learn more button or an anchor link that takes you to a footer where that legal copy can be, collapsible in some way so that you're not interrupting that easy, simple human narrative, but you're still making sure that that legal copy is there. So you're kind of covering your ass in both ways there. Yeah.
Working with different clients, do you ever had a chance to take one solution and implement it on another client?
Yes. I think the anchor link collapsing all your legal copy at the bottom. So we work with a lot of financial clients. I'm sure many of you have been on many, banking websites. You scroll to the bottom, the footer often has about, 15 inches of legal copy in tiny text at the bottom. So we developed some solutions with several clients. It's very simple, just collapsing that into, a collapsible accordion, making sure that there's a link maybe where you're seeing. We've had many legal teams try to put, a footnote after pretty much everything we've said for financial clients, for coffee clients talking about sustainability, trying to caveat basically everything that they're saying. So yes, we have stolen this solution of just directing people to the footer. There's a collapsible legal section that doesn't interrupt that flow of the page. So we can kind of keep our nice story, keep our human content, our human conversation, and put all the stuff that needs to be there, but nobody wants to read, keep it on the page at the bottom.
All right, thank you. And Tim, do you have any tips or ideas how we can make sure that our users understand what they're reading? How to make it accessible for them when writing legal stuff?
Yeah, I think, Sean, if this answers the question, I think to take the legal team through our process sometimes we'll start out with something that's much longer sometimes than we want it to be, and maybe more complex than we want it to be. So I think legal teams, once they understand the process of, to write is human, to edit is divine, to go through that process of, you have your first draft, let's cut it in half, ideally, and then let's cut it in half again. I think they want to do that too, to some extent. And I have had some success with that if you really understand what needs to be, if you understand the why of what the risks are with certain copy, and understand, they're always thinking in terms of prominence, proximity, and covering all the risks. So if you understand that as well, if you dig in enough, you can sometimes, I've had these conversations, well, yeah, we actually don't need this disclaimer here, or we can put a footnote and put it on the bottom. It doesn't need to be right close to whatever that particular language says. So as Kate was touching on, you can, use progressive disclosure, to make the experience look nicer and cleaner. And then we've sort of talked a little bit about just making the copy more plain language, if you really understand the intent of what needs to be expressed. So I don't know, without specific examples, I think we've probably all run into those scenarios where we've just sometimes have to give in a little bit and meet in the middle. But if we understand it, we can put our power to work and make it understandable, more conversational, more plain language that covers us.
Thank you. And Jed, do you have any tips to make same questions only in a product like Lemonade, which is more related to insurance?
Yeah.
So what are the challenges to make the content accessible, the legal content accessible to people that actually need to understand what they're signing up for?
Yeah. So luckily, like the bulk of the So Lemonade, for those of you who don't know, is a app and a website you can buy insurance on, renter's home, car, pet, life. And it's done through this chat interface in the app where Maya, a chatbot, is like, hi, what kind of insurance do you want? And you pick an insurance and she's like, great, I'll get you set up. And it's filling out a form via answering a bunch of, like having a text conversation with somebody. So luckily in that, since we're just gathering information, there's not a whole lot of legal kind of stipulations or kind of guardrails in that experience. Once you get to the end of the flow and we're like, here's your policy, that's obviously where like the heavy language hits in. And even with our policies at Lemonade, we have worked to make them not as confusing and complicated and long-winded as traditional insurance policies. But like I said before, they still do need to have a certain level of complication, otherwise they become useless. So I haven't actually worked on the policy side of things. There's another team for that. But I do work on emails sometimes, and sometimes we have an email that we need to send out. Regulators are like, you have to inform your customers about this, and even our emails are very conversational. So that's a problem to solve when we send out an email that is trying to get across this complicated thing that we have to tell them. I've had experiences at all of my jobs where if you've got this as a UX writer, you write, say, a paragraph or a sentence, and then you send it off to legal, and then legal just rewrites it and sends it back to you, and it's just a whole new sentence. And what you want to do, this is what happens to me. I look at a sentence and I start thinking, okay, well, if I was going to make this a little more conversational, I'd change this, I'd take this out, and then I've just rewritten my original sentence. So like, that's not gonna ever work out. So that's when I'm like, let's get together, let's get face to face. And that is really where and we said this before, you need to understand the why. You need to understand what this sentence is doing, what would make this sentence not okay, so you can figure out what makes the sentence okay. And sometimes it's a process. You're sitting down and you're like, okay, if we say this instead of this, and they're like, nah, that's no problem. If we say this instead of this, great. I like to think of it, this might not be the best way to describe it, but if you take something that's legal and you just sort of like push it and you push it and you push it until it's illegal. And then you step back, you take it back a step, so it's still on the legal side. That's not exactly, I just thought that would be funny to say. I shouldn't have said it. But it's like any kind of iteration. Like you push it until it stops working, and then you bring it back to where it was working, and you're like, is this it, or do we push it in another direction? Yeah, and also one of my favorite tricks, and this is true even not outside of legal. Sometimes you can just be like, what if we just delete it? And sometimes if it's a sentence that if the sentence is the problem, and you're like, what if we just don't say it? And the lawyer's like, yeah, that would be great. I'm like, great, let's not say it, and then, you don't have to write anything. So that's a little tip.
That's great. And I wanted to follow up on that. So let's say that you work with a team of writers and you had this back and forth communication with the legal team. And now you decided, for example, that you're going to call it transactions and not purchases, for example. So is there any trick to make it consistent across your team? So you wouldn't have to have that back and forth communication with the legal again, or that your colleague wouldn't have to do it? Like, is there a style guide or something that you set up to make like consistent legal writing in your team?
I've only ever been a team of one, so I'm not the right one to answer this question. I did just put together a style guide. So my answer is yes, put together a style guide.
And you also have like a section which is like legal writing inside of that style guide, right?
Yeah. I mean, basically, like any time I'm historically very bad at like keeping records of things, but anytime you've come to a decision in a group, you've got to somehow make a note of that and then disseminate that to the team. Otherwise, you're just going to keep making that mistake again. But if anyone here has great.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Actually, at Robinhood, I early on was on a part of the Content Standards Committee, which is a group of, I'm not a team of one. We have lots of content designers, which is great. And it's just a small committee voluntarily. I advocated that we got free lunch when we meet. So that's the bonus. And we would chat about things like this. And one of the members, or actually anybody can contribute to it. And then the content committee works on it. And someone, a content designer at Robinhood who's here, Andrew, put together a glossary. So we have Robinhood glossary, and literally it's like a Google sheet that you just command find, right? The words. And we did a similar thing at my previous company at Capital One. We had a glossary, use this word, not this word. Or if you're going to use transactions, it means this. If you're using purchases, it means they received, goods or services for the money that they transferred. So highly recommend a glossary and being a part of either the content standards or even better, the design standards. Make it really easily accessible. And then we have, what's the title called? Bento Boss that helps. The Bento Boss. Bento is our design system. Get it? Makes sense. So putting the content in there, but also we have a content committee. One of the roles is a propagandist. And the propagandist is there to let everyone know, here's the glossary, here's the word, or here's the standards that we're using. We find that to be really helpful.
That's awesome.
I'm just going to add on that a little bit.
Please.
We have something just like that.
Copycat.
I think we were around before you.
Best practices.
However, I will say, you made me think of something. I think a competitive audit can sometimes be helpful in understanding your competitors and what they're doing in getting legal to move in the direction you want them to go in. Oh, well, Robinhood's doing this, the same thing this way, or Lemonade's doing this way, or whatever. We've seen this, so you put it back on them. So it can be a nice strategy to rely on sometimes.
Definitely. The amount of time I looked at Maya, the chatbot, and said, okay, Lemonade are designing their chatbot in that way. So I refer to it a lot of times. The writing is on point over there. But I did want to ask, so the glossary is in Google Sheets, and you have the person that is in charge to make sure, to spread the word about it. But I want to ask also, team, how do you make sure to make the style guide accessible to others? Because sometimes you just have a document that nobody use or nobody open. And even like in what mediums do you use in order to make sure that other people in the team will use something like that?
Yeah, that's a big challenge, especially at a huge company like JPMorgan. We have, I don't know how many style guides, probably I've seen dozens across lines of business, across departments.
Brand marketing, right?
Yeah, it's it's a challenge, to say the least. We are looking at some software to try and consolidate those standards into one place. It's a little ways off yet, but as we've been the content organization's been growing, I think we've been doing a very good job of socializing what we're working on now and spreading that word bit by bit. I mean, I don't know, other than doing it that way, like just building those relationships one person at a time and sharing it. I share it with all my partners every chance that I get. So, and I think the rest of the team is doing that as well. So it's it can be tedious, but I don't know of a better way. I mean, there is some software out there that we're exploring that can kind of just send it out to everyone.
Like what?
And then maybe, we won't be needed, but I think we will still be. There's companies out there like Writer and Acrolinks that take your stuff. There's a lot of upfront work that needs to be done to input all of your standards and your guidelines into the software, and then it becomes like an internal Grammarly. We're looking at that.
That's awesome. And Kate, when working with different type of projects, different type of clients, and so how do you create that type of consistency?
Oh, we can't. We don't. the best clients, and they're 1 in a million, have an interactive style guide of some kind that includes copywriting guidelines as well as design guidelines. And that is the best case scenario. I would say 1 in 5 clients has a legal style guide that they can at least pass along to us, so we can give it to the copywriter so they know from the get-go, you can say this, you can't say that, etc. So if any of you guys working, all of you people working client side, please put those together for your agency partners. They make our lives a million times easier, and they save time in every project. But in the absence of those documents, you know, it's a trial and error. And that's why, you know, back to what we've all been saying, bringing those legal teams in early and often, understanding the intent behind why they're making the changes that they're making, why they're making the suggestions that they're making, why they're cutting your stuff or changing your stuff is so important. But yes, to everyone out there, if you could please create those legal style guides, those legal copy guidelines for us, for your agency partners, so you can hand them off to us and we can write copy that is suitable on our first try as opposed to our 10th try. That would be great. But yeah, it's very hard to create consistency otherwise, especially when you're working across 10 different accounts or 5 different accounts, whatever it might be. Every client is different. Every client has a different way of organizing their information. But yes, it's having that consolidated, sounds like, you know, Google Doc, or you can say this, you can't say this, is always very helpful for us. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, so I think it would be a good time to move to the Q&A. So now we could answer some questions. I have some people that ask already, but we can start with a raise of hand, and then we could start like that. Yes.
So it can look and has, oh yes, I will repeat the question so you can all can hear. What exactly does that style guide look like? What should it look like, or what could it look like? There's no one right way. I have seen it incorporated into kind of an interactive design guidelines. So if you can imagine, you know, you have your own software system where you're curating all of your design guidelines as well as your copy and style guidelines as part of that. We also sometimes just get PDFs by email that have those kind of legal guidelines. But there's no one way that I've seen clients provide that. But if you guys have suggestions, sounds like sounds like Robinhood. Sounds like Robinhood has it down. And Celine maybe has some thoughts on that. No, just standing. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's my best answer.
Anyone else want to follow up on that?
I would say it's just a design challenge. And with any design challenge, one of the keys is know your audience. Who are you designing this for? And if you're designing it, for example, for your product designers to use it, where are they working? Where is it most convenient for them? You don't want to build a style guide or a content guideline or a glossary that is just lost in the ether and just put on the digital shelf that no one uses. So the Bento boss is integrating it into, we use Figma, you know, Sketch or whatever you're using, actually integrated into Figma. And the library, the asset library, is ideal. So when designers are pulling in assets to create new experiences and designs, bam, they have an example of good content like that. But if you're at an agency and you're working for different things, I know that can be hard, but maybe PDF, so you can fax it or something, you know, just know your audience and design a solution like that.
I love the tip of making it accessible in the design tool as part of the design system. Great tip.
This is making me, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say my current experience with JPMorgan coming up on a year, I haven't been, as I was saying, I haven't been very involved with legal teams, but I have tons of previous experience with asset managers and financial services and banks. And the last sort of engagement that I was in was with US Bank, and they had a very extensive internal, like, legal site with all of their disclaimer and organized pretty extensively. I don't know if maybe some of the other JPMorgan people here can have seen that. I would imagine we have something like that. But they had and it was a challenge too, because they would just say, well, this is we've established this copy, we've established this disclaimer, this disclosure for this scenario, and it can't change. You have to accept, just put it where it needs to go. So there's no real conversation, or it feels like there's no conversation in those circumstances, that they had buttoned it down. And, I don't know, maybe people have some experience with how you can get around those scenarios, but in some ways it was easier that it was that buttoned up.
Yeah, usually
You just move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It probably can make your life a little easier. Yeah, if you can hide it somewhere.
Jed,
What was I going to say? Oh, I'm going to, tomorrow, because of this, I'm going to write to the compliance team, and I'm going to be like, just to start this, because it's so huge. Like, how do you start? Like, you have a spreadsheet now, but like, where does it start? Like, what's the seed? And I'm going to just go to them. I'm going to say, please give me a list of what are we not allowed to say? Or like, what are the things that we know we can't say? It's sort of like the transaction of like, it's a glossary essentially, but like, I know there are phrases that I have written or I've seen written before, and it's like, oh, we can't, like, you cannot refer to it that way. But if you don't know that, or you're learning it every time you write something new, you're just doing the work over and over again. So even just like a great starting point for this kind of thing, if you're trying to build one from nothing, is just sitting down with the legal team and being like, what are the things we have to always say? What are the things that we can never say? And like, what's in the middle there? Because there's always going to be phrases or words that like can get a company in trouble. There's always going to be phrases or words that don't have any legal weight to them. So just kind of getting that down as a starting point, which is what I'm going to do tomorrow, is I think a great place to start.
Yeah, I will add it, even beyond just the language and the words. We have a client where it goes to imagery, to icons, to other things that you can't show. So, we can't show a money sign, we can't show a graph always going up. So, thinking beyond just the words on the page to the imagery, the icons, all that stuff is helpful.
thanks.
Yeah, as long as it ends where it started. Yeah. Jed, start with what you know. Start with what you know. You don't know everything, but you know something, and start there. For financial institutions, typically, you can't say free. Nothing's free. So don't say free. Always. Legal and compliance hates always. I had a product partner try to sneak the word forever in there. True story. I let it live because I knew it would die. And it did. In legal and compliance, we had a laugh about it. Forever, always, never sometimes works, because sometimes never is true. But free doesn't work. So for example, at Robinhood, we can't say no fees, but we can say commission free. And that's kind of like where we started, a big thing, right? Commission free trading, that's awesome. But there are other fees. So I know that whenever I say commission free, I know I'm going to say other fees may apply, and I'm comfortable linking out to the fee schedule. You want to be transparent, because let's be honest, if you're signing up for something that potentially could cost you money and have fees, you want to know. I want to know, right? So I want that to be transparent. I want people to know, oh, okay, there is a fee for this, that, and the other thing. But the thing that I'm going to be doing the most of, or whatever, I know that this is commission free, for example.
All right.
Start with what you know.
Awesome tips. I have a questions from the audience. So my company creates content-driven technologies that help attorneys do their best work, even on unfamiliar matters. So I'm curious to know the thoughts of the panel about writing UX copy for lawyers themselves. That's a tricky one because,
Well, I don't do that, but
yeah, that's why it's tricky.
yeah, if I did, it's the same answer. It's a design challenge. Know your audience, right? If they are experts, you write for experts. They know the jargon, they know the legalese, the things that's going to be in a contract. You write that. At Robinhood, right, our mission is to democratize finance for all. And while investing may traditionally have been in the realm of professional traders, in Wall Street or wherever, we want everyone to be able to trade. And so we are writing in a way that anyone can understand. But if you're writing for lawyers, then you understand the words and the phrases, and you speak to them, and they go, yeah, you're speaking to me. Heretofore after.
My only add-on to that would be that lawyers are people too, and they also appreciate human, understandable copy. So I think if we want to move our world away from where lawyers feel the need to speak in secret codes that none of us understand, we should be pushing them as well to speak in human, accessible language. And so I don't think just because you work in a specific field, I do agree with you, write for your audience 100%, but also I think accessible language is accessible for everyone, and we should be aiming for that no matter who our audience is.
Definitely. And I would do also a lot of research, talk to them, do some user interviews, understand their lingo, basically.
Yeah, I think this might be more might be more about tone than about anything else. You might not want to be like, hey, how you doing? Although maybe you would. Again, it's like your audience. Maybe they would love that. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, most audience, like UX writing at its core needs to be like simple and short and clear. So the changes between brands, in my experience, is generally in the tone of voice of the product. So, and that's like it's a whole nother level, whole nother skill set. But yeah, so it's just like you would want to be like, what are they using it for? Are they in the mood to like have a little fun, or are they just trying to like get something done and they don't want to waste their time like honking, being sassed by a user interface.
I think back to Sean's point of knowing I guess it would depend on the law firm. The personal injury attorneys certainly appreciated jingle. So I guess, Celino and Barnes, for those who remember that. But others are going to want to be a lot more serious and corporate attorneys.
All right, thank you. So we have another questions here about timelines. So what are your strategies for collaborating on mutually agreeable solution on a fast timeline? For example, avoiding a lawyer saying, we can't say that, and abandoning the Google Doc.
You can't avoid that. No, that's not true. In some cases, like you're always going, so the question, you have a mic, they heard it. Communication, it is like we've touched on this before, like the earlier you get face-to-face with somebody and know exactly what they're wanting, rather than if you like just read the brief or you read the notes or you watch a meeting and then you like create the content and push it out there, the more it's almost certainly going to come back and being like, we can't do this. So it's all about doing that extra work ahead of time, figuring out exactly the scenario, knowing more than just the brief, knowing the things surrounding it. A lot of UX is knowing where the user is right before the thing that you're working on and where they're going to be afterwards, where it fits within the large flow. So you need to know all of that too, because otherwise, if you don't have all the information, you're going to write something that is not going to work in all cases.
And I would just add to that, putting my like account director hat on, is rather than delivering a 200-page copy doc at the end of your copywriting process or your design process, whatever it might be, writing one page and passing it off to the legal team and making sure that your workflow is not do all this work and then hand it off to legal and see what happens. It's do a little work, hand some of it off to legal, get their feedback, and then every other thing becomes more efficient in your workflow after that. And I think that has helped us avoid the kind of pitfall of you do tons of copywriting work and then it goes to legal and it's all just cut and you're kind of starting from square one. So early and often is probably our catchword of the night. Yeah.
Thanks.
+1 to all of that for sure. I would also add that give yourself space and time. Try not to work in a silo too much, but giving yourselves time means don't meet with legal and compliance for 30 minutes. I meet with legal and compliance weekly for an hour and a half, every single week. Oh yeah, we're best friends. But give yourself an hour, and that gives you time to have these conversations back and forth to get clarity on it. I almost never get to a good resolution in 30 minutes because you feel rushed, right? You've got another meeting to go to, something else to do, and legal is going to say, well, the company's not going to take that risk, so you have to say this. And it ends up being something that's maybe not as conversational as it could be. But if you give yourself space and time, they're going to say, oh, you have to say this. And you go, okay, I got another 30 minutes. Let's keep going. What if I said it this way? What if I said it that way? What's the true intent of it? And you can go through all the strategies that you go through. And I found having that space and time is really critical to landing on something that they feel comfortable with, that's low risk or no risk, and that you feel comfortable with, that's going to resonate and be understandable for your customer base.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Jacob.
So we don't need to have the legal team in the kickoff, but what we usually do is ask them what their legal review process is. So right from the beginning. So it's like, how long does it typically take for your legal team to review XYZ document, product design, et cetera, so that we can build that into the timeline from the beginning, and so that the client starts internalizing the fact that, you know, we're not going to be the blocker, that the blocker will probably come on their end, and that, you know, they need to be aware and managing their own internal teams and their own internal legal teams to make sure they're, you know, able to meet the timelines that the brand team or the marketing team has set. Because I think, you know, they kind of often will come full steam ahead. We want to get this website live. We want to get this product live, this page live, whatever it might be, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. And then we'll say, great, what's your legal review process? How long does that usually take? And then they'll be like, oh, you know, that takes a while and we may need to adjust our timeline. So I think it's not necessarily about having the legal team in the meeting. It's just making your brand team or your marketing team, which again, different as an agency team over here, but making them aware from the beginning that these are the pitfalls or these are the things that may hold up their timeline. So just making them conscious of those things from the beginning is very helpful.
I have here another question about tips for working with highly risk-averse legal teams. So, any tips about that? Yeah.
All legal teams are highly risk-averse. That's their job. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone here from the audience? Yes.
I would say putting it back on them a little bit, like it comes back to, without us having a specific scenario, understanding the why of who's involved at certain times and what specifically their concerns are, and digging in deep to understand that. And then, I mean, sometimes it can be helpful to have stakeholders or product or other people come in the room as well. if legal's coming in and holding, so you have a deadline and legal's holding something up, then you gotta, I mean, it goes back to starting those conversations early. And I was on a team early on where we knew, we had deadlines that were several months out. So we were setting up weekly reviews and meetings, a weekly legal war room. It was not a very compelling name for a meeting for sure. But having that, building that relationship early on and making sure you brought everyone in can help avoid that. I mean, I think you're going to run into some sort of circumstances where it's unavoidable and then you just got to fight it out. Sounds like.
And I think that's where the design solution comes in, where in some ways it's inevitably a losing battle with legal, where you have to have these certain things on the site, and rather than changing your copy or changing your hierarchy or whatever it might be, finding a design solution to essentially hide that copy, but it's there, it's checking their box and it's not disrupting your design, has been, sometimes you just have to say, okay, we have to put this 1,700 word disclaimer on the site somewhere. How can we do it in a way that is, as less distracting as possible to the user? And finding that kind of design solution, it's probably not going to be in your content or your copy, but it's going to be in the experience design of the page or the site of the product, is the best way to get around that, in my experience.
In my experience, legal and compliance partners are officially consultants, in a way that they're adding their expertise on where the risk is, where it's really high and where it's medium low. And it's oftentimes a business decision on how much risk they want to take on, because there's a variation of solutions where you can have the contract right there on your value prop page, or you could have it completely hidden, right? And maybe completely hidden, you're taking on a lot more risk. And so, yeah, to double down, I think Tim said, sometimes you need air cover. Bring in, your high level product manager or the business person. There's usually an accountable executive. And you say, okay, here's the design option with a lot of legalese right there, front and center, that, do you want to release that, which is probably going to confuse customers and decrease conversion rate and decrease revenue? Or do you want this other solution, which increases, regulatory risk or whatever? And so sometimes having air cover, but what we've said the whole time is build a relationship, right? And so I think your example was like, oh, what if it's someone new and you don't have a relationship with that specific expert? Hopefully you have advocates in the room, in the meeting with you, right? You have your other legal and compliance partners who can chime in. And even though they're not, maybe the SME on the specific topic, but they can say, well, I don't think the risk is that high because earlier in the experience, we blah, blah, blah. So building the relationships is going to help even when you do get a bogey. Is that what we're referring to this person as? A bogey?
We'll take a few more questions from the audience, and that will be it. Yes. 1 second, I will give you the mic.
Hope it doesn't feedback. Is there a specific chunk of legalese that comes top of mind that you were able to rewrite as kind of like a favorite that you could give an example of? And how you made it a more friendly solution?
Yes and no. I previously worked at Capital One, and if you go to CapitalOne.com and you scroll to the bottom of the page, in all the footer, there's a privacy link. That's where all the legal stuff lives. I got loaned out actually to the team that was working on that, and I won't go into all the details, but we had to design this experience where that was the first page, and then there was a flow that went beyond that. It's called Manage Your Data. You can click on that. Manage Your Data is a really beautiful page that I'm proud of, and I wrote all the content for that. And what happened was we did the Manage Your Data, and we did the whole flow, and I worked with some amazing designers and supported and blah, blah, blah. But we also had C-level involvement, literally, this is large company, and it was scary. And I said, let's redesign the privacy page. And they were like, no, that is legal's wheelhouse. That's like, you're in their territory, full on, and there's no messing around. And I said, yeah, there is. And we had a really talented designer, and I was like, let's redesign it, but we won't change any of the words. Let's just make it better, like experience. And he was like, are we allowed to? And I was like, let's just do it. We'll just do it. And he was like, well, what should it look like? Like, because I was kind of giving him carte blanche. And there was another content designer who had done a new experience. It was nothing legal, and it was really gorgeous. And so I showed the designer, I was like, how about something like this? And he was like, ooh, I've never seen that. That's pretty. And he redesigned the privacy page. And this is a true story, if you can tell. And I showed the director of design on this project. And she was like, that's gorgeous, but no way. We're going to get these VPs and MVPs. No way we're touching it. I was like, let me show it. Let me show it. And she was like, no. And what we did, we had a design studio, and we printed out the whole flow of manager data. And the first one was the /privacy. It was ugly. It was really ugly. It was just poorly designed because it was legal's land and whatever. So here's the negotiation that I got. I said, okay, when we take the stuff on the wall, it's like, let's print out the good one. We'll put it underneath the current one. So they came down, and when they're looking, they see what they're familiar with. They're like, yeah, that's all the words. It's ugly and it's right. And then they see manager data, which is pretty good, which we're getting feedback on. Well, they got to the first screen of manager data, and they said, well, and they had some feedback on it. And I stood up. I was the most junior person in the room. I stood up and I walked over, and the director of design looked at me. And I was like, I'm doing it. And I went over and I lifted up the crappy page, and I revealed the beautiful page. And the MVP of design looked at it. She was quiet. And she said, yeah, something like this. This is good. I like that. And I threw my hands up because I couldn't help it. I was excited. And the MVP, who is not known for giving positive feedback on anything ever, in an email, so it's documented, she gave positive feedback on that redesign. And I screenshotted it and gave it to my manager, and I got a promotion later. Go to /privacy. It's a true story.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey there, Art from Amex. Question for Sean, and I think Tim kind of touched on it as well, or anyone. Throughout my history, the relationship with legal always builds slowly but organically, and a relationship built on trust from having successes together. However, I know from the relationship with other stakeholders that could quickly be accelerated via friendship, or at least some sort of personal bond. And it's very easy with other stakeholders like product and dev. We're sort of at the same level, but sometimes these attorneys are hanging out with the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. So just curious what some of the tactics, techniques, so forth, of sort of breaking that ice and making it appealing to go hang out and have lunch with the content strategist, go and have maybe even a beer. Any ideas on that?
First off, Art, I give you permission. You're allowed. You're not just a content strategist. You're Art. And you deserve to be at happy hour with the lawyers too. They're people too. True story, when I first joined Capital One, this one will be shorter. Content strategy was separate from design. And I wasn't sure. I didn't know we were designers. And I ended up becoming really good friends with like product and other folks, and was able to go out, and I was the only designer there. So it's okay if you're the only content designer there. And the truth is, like, your legal and compliance partners, they care about the words. They care about the words a lot. And so do we, right? And so just build a bond with them and be the one to invite them out. You know, you can be the one to just take it and run with it. And they'll go, wow, I've never been in, only the CEO invites me out to drinks. Like, cool, now I get to hang out with Art. So yeah, they'll like it, they'll appreciate it. And yeah, the reviews will go much smoother.
Yeah, to add to that, I would just say that I think they look at us as the cool kids. Like, oh, can I, I want to hang out with marketing or whatever, or content and design. Like I think they're secretly thinking they want to hang out with us. So I think if you,
The general counsel was on Survivor, so maybe not him. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Wow.
I have found that though, even in, especially in some of the more conservative corporate environments, they, if you've built that relationship, don't ever rush them. Make sure you give them the time they need to review stuff, and they'll be okay. Art's cool. Next thing you know, you're like best buds.
And I'd say like,
Unfortunately,
now you have a new best friend you got to hang out with all the time. I know not everybody uses Slack, but most tech companies do. And in this era of Slack and remote work, it's like too easy to just like message anybody at the company and be like, hey, can I put a half hour on your calendar? And like, I did that in my first couple of weeks of Lemonade, and I was talking to people. I was like, I got no right to be talking to this person, but I was just like, well, why not? And like, now you just end up knowing everybody. You can know whoever you. I mean, no one's obligated. Like, someone might never respond to your Slack, but it can't hurt to try. And like, with things like Slack, and especially Slack plus remote work, just those barriers are down. Like, everybody's on this like same platform. You're just a face on a screen, which is like a benefit too, because you're just another person, and you're like, let's have a meeting. And then once you have that meeting, whether it's in person or over Zoom, like, they know who you are and you know who they are. And like that has happened, and that won't stop. And it's the first step towards any kind of relationship. So, I'd say no matter what, like, if you're working in a company and there's somebody there who you want to know for whatever professional reason, just go for it. Like, nothing's really stopping you.
I love that. I think that's awesome. And I actually accidentally did that today. You can start with appreciation. So I just did a 2-day turnaround on legal and compliance yesterday. It was terrible. It was probably my fault too. I messed it up. But we took all their feedback. We redesigned it last night and this morning, and because we need it to be good by Friday. And so we went back to legal and compliance today, and we nailed it. Well, I give credit to my designer. She nailed it. And I messaged the legal and compliance partner who stayed after yesterday. The prickly one dropped off. Another one stayed on. I slacked him, and I just started with appreciation. Hey, thanks so much for working with us and specifying the feedback so that we could address it. The prickly one is more comfortable with the solution where we landed today. So thanks for that help. Start with appreciation, and don't be afraid to slap them. Yeah, totally.
Great answers. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So I wanted to ask about internationalization of content, specifically legal. I'm just very curious around like how you go about it, because most companies design in English and not every concept exists in every language. So how do you go about handling that translation?
I have an answer to that. So we're lucky at Lemonade to have a couple of people whose job is to do translations. But translation is, as you sort of alluded to, it's only part of the job. Localization is also really, really important and totally forgotten, and something that cannot be done by a machine, not yet anyway. So basically at Lemonade, things are written in English, and then when we expand into a new territory or somewhere that has a language which it's not currently in, the entire flow, everything, the website, it all just goes through a person. It may go through a machine translation first, like the bigger stuff, and then kind of be touched up. But like, I have a relationship with all those translators, and like, we have one of my favorite things to do, because a lot of my coworkers are in Tel Aviv, so I get to I really enjoy speaking to people who I like learning about idioms in other languages. It's just one that's like very funny to see like what exists and what doesn't exist. And that's kind of ultimately like localization is that's where it comes to. It's like these things need to make sense to the people who are reading them. And it needs to sound like they're spoken by somebody who's natural in that language. I've actually been working over the last few weeks. We're localizing British English. It's very much the same as American English, but there are some little things that we have to do to make sure that it rings true to somebody who's in the United Kingdom and not here. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but
Yeah.
it's yeah.
I guess as a follow-up, like you make guidelines, right? And so in English, like there are a lot of guidelines that
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
Is it possible in a world where as we become more global, that these guidelines have to be created for each language, or is that too much
No,
work?
no. And then we're working on something like that right now. Like basically the same person who's doing the translations and the localizations also is putting together some kind of, because some of it is done out of house. So they put together the guidelines as well for each language. I lost it.
All good. You answered it. Thank you.
Ironically enough, mine was also about localization, so I was so happy you said it. Additionally, though, I guess I was wondering, beyond translation, you have to, be conscious of changing policy. So, like, yeah, GDPR is like the hot topic, but we know it's going beyond that, even in America, but other countries as well. And with legal teams, I also love working with legal teams; they're great. How do we all hold each other accountable? What recommendations do you have for mutual accountability of, is this still okay? How do we know what's coming in this country, in this region, in this area? Is this accessible or inclusive? What are your accountability best practices while partnering with legal teams?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't been involved with this aspect of our content and legal collaborations at JPMorgan Chase, but at some other, it's handled, it's like a handoff. So if you're at this global company, I know it doesn't sound very collaborative to pass it off, but those other teams in other regions and countries, they become the expert. So it's now it's in their court. I mean, that's how it's been handled for me. So, we have offices wherever, then we just pass it. We're really not involved.
Yeah, double down. We're not expected to be legal and compliance subject matter experts. There should be someone at the company that's accountable for making sure the company is obeying all the laws and regulations of the districts wherever the company plans to exist or currently exists. So someone's accountable for that. And then they can bring that to us as content designers and say, okay, we have this regulation, here's the place where we need to implement it, or even we need to do a content audit. We need to audit all of the experience or this part of the experience to make sure that we're XYZ. And then you can bring your skills of like how to abide by it, but you don't have to know the whole, all the regulations in all the countries. Hopefully you're not wearing multiple hats like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so that's about it for the panel for today. And thank you. Thank you.